Okay, so I just want to give you guys a brief introduction to Things Fall Apart. So I'll do it in two parts, the first half of the novel and the second half of the novel. So, as you know by now, the story is set in Nigeria in the late 1880s, before the arrival of the British, who ruled the region from 1860s until about 1960, which is 2 years after the novel was published. It was published in 1958. Britain was drawn to Nigeria by the slave trade, but it was also attracted to the region's natural resources, particularly their palm oil, but also cotton. Nigeria has a number of ethnic groups and linguistic regions, and Achebe focuses on where he's from, on the Igbo language and religion, which is right down here where I'm putting my cursor. Part of the purpose, I think, for writing the novel is to preserve a culture that has vanished. That is to help us understand what Nigeria was like before the British arrived, and also to kind of try to explain why things fell apart. That is, why the colonialists were so successful. And so I think a central question in the novel then is, why do things fall apart? And what Achebe does is he focuses on a man, Okonkwo, and on a village, Umofia. Um, and he said, when there's an interview that I posted for you online on Moodle, but he said he didn't want to idealize the past, right? He wanted to be as honest as possible. That is, it's fiction, but he felt that feels that you can tell the truth through fiction. And so Okonkwo has a lot of positives, right? He's a very hard worker. We hear about how he gets his start with yams, right? He's a good provider. He has three wives and quite a few children. He's a brave warrior, right? He's collected several heads, and he keeps his first head for like his wine glass. And he's also quite well respected. He has a number of titles, and he's known as a leader of the tribe. But Okonkwo also has some negative traits that partly come from the way he was raised or the way he grew up. Um, Particularly striking and sort of offensive to a lot of modern readers is that he beats his wives, right? Partly because he has these peculiar notions of masculinity. And probably the worst thing he does in the first part of the novel is he kills Ike Mafuna, who has become his adopted son. He was a hostage that was given to the village after one of their members killed someone in a neighboring village. And so Okonkwo seems to be dominated, at least Achebe tells us, by a primary flaw being a fear of failure and weakness, as he says on page 13. And the reason why, at least Achebe seems to suggest, is because of his father's own failures. And so, one of the things, besides looking at pre-colonial Nigeria, one of the things that the story is about is a relationship between fathers and sons. Unoka Okonkwo's father was known as Abala, that is, a female, but also somebody who's weak or without titles. His failures basically form his son Okonkwo into the man he is, right? A man, Achebe tells us, who rejects all that was weak in his father, but this, like laziness or idleness, but this also includes gentleness, right? And emotional closeness. And Okonkwo's fears about weakness in turn form his son Nwoye into who he is and cause him ultimately to be alienated from his father. And we see this in the part where after Ike Mafuna is killed, um, and on page 61, um, we find that Ike Mafuna runs to Okonkwo in fear, and Okonkwo drew his machete and cut him down. He was afraid of being thought weak. And Nwoye, when he learns about this, it feels like the snapping of a tightened bow. He did not cry, he just hung limp, and this is really a defining moment. I just wanted to show you before I talk a little bit about what we also learn about the village and the culture. I wanted to just show you a few scenes. The novel opens with Okonkwo being known as a very good wrestler, still popular among kids today. This is a picture of an obi, so there's descriptions of the way in which the Umuofians live. Here's another one to give you a sense. And so Okonkwo would have one. You see a gathering here. He'd have one, and then each of his wives would have her own. This is a picture of the Ejwu, which is the law council, right, in which Okonkwo is one of these men. They would wear the masks, and we see described, the case in which, for instance, so that we know that beating one's wife is not accepted in this culture, the man who kept beating his wife, and so it needs to be brought to the elders to be decided. This is a picture of palm tree tapping the palm juice, which then is fermented into wine, which is the favored drink, which we hear a lot about. This is the kola nut. We learn that you go over to someone's house, and you share a kola nut, which apparently is like caffeine, has caffeinated or caffeine-like properties in it. And then finally, of course, yams. I didn't know the difference between an African yam and a sweet potato, but now I do. And one of the things that's sort of charming about this book is the various proverbs that we learn that Achebe had remembered from his youth. A child's fingers are not scalded by a piece of hot yam which its mother puts into its palm. In other words, right, if a mother tells you to do something, it shouldn't harm you. She doesn't want to harm you. And Okonkwo brings up this saying when he's arguing with Obirika over whether or not it was legitimate or valid for him to kill Ikemefuna. All right, so Things Fall Apart is also about a community. And again, it seems to me that Achebe presents us with both positives and negatives. On the one hand, Igbo culture, we're told at the beginning, they conduct no unjust wars. It's a culture in which you're judged by what you accomplish. And so even though Okonkwo came from a poor family, had a father who was not respected, he can nonetheless achieve great things. There's a lot of respect for elders, for the wisdom of elders in the community and ancestors. I mentioned already their law council, right, which settles land disputes, but also obviously familial problems. And they also appear to have a very tight community. They have various traditions like Peace Week, which is right before a major agricultural period in which there can be no fighting, and that's partly probably so that it brings the community together, knowing that they will be working very, very hard and dependent on each other in the weeks ahead. And it's during that week that Okonkwo beats one of his wives, and it's very bad. There are also a lot of problems, though, at least from modern Western eyes, with Igbo culture. Twins, for instance, are abandoned in the evil forest. Or if you're sick with what is perceived to be what they call like a wasting disease, probably something that they assumed would be infectious, you are left out in the evil forest to die. We also find human sacrifice in the form of Ikemefuna. And also, kind of in the middle of the book, we see Okonkwo exiled even for what they call a female crime, an inadvertent crime, when his gun goes off and kills a kid on accident. And Obiorika, who was Okonkwo's friend, is often, I think, used by Achebe to sort of be a voice of criticism, might be too strong a word, but questioning, right? Um, for instance, when Ikemefuna, when the oracle declares that he should be killed, he says that's fine, but that doesn't mean he would have to do it, right? And he certainly questions when Okonkwo was exiled for a crime that was not his fault. There are also a few other things. One's chi, which seems to be like one's spirit or guardian angel, and they have this saying when a man's chi says, I'm sorry, when a man says yes, his chi says yes also. Meaning if you try hard, right, your so called chi or luck or fate or whatever will be in your favor. The abanya, that's that odd ritual, right, where the priest, after Okonkwo's wife has had so many infant deaths and miscarriages, his second wife, and finally she has Enzima, right, which is Okonkwo's favorite daughter or favorite kid even. And there's this weird ritual when she gets sick to go find the Obanya, that is the child the demon that's resurrected, presumably. And this belief is probably related to a high infant mortality rate. Perhaps it's a ritual that provides some consolation, I suppose, to parents. And then finally, we have the Oracle of the Hills and Caves. It seems to be a really patriarchal culture, right? Men are in control. But it's funny that even though the word Agbala is used for a female, for somebody who's weak, for somebody who's without titles, like Okonkwo's father, it's also the name of the priestess, right? Which in some ways is the most powerful person in the village because she relays out of the cave the deity's wishes, right? Okay, so that's the first half, and just things again to look for is how does Achebe try to explain to us or show us why things fall apart? Thanks.